Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. The overall crime rate in Vermont is among the lowest in the country, and that makes Vermont one of the safest places to live. But that's not true for all who live here. Every year, a majority of all Vermont homicides are domestic violence related. Domestic violence is also at the root of sexual assault, as well as physical and mental abuse. There are advocates and safe havens around the state, and one of them, here in Chittenden County, is Women Helping Battered Women. Joining me this afternoon are two guests from Women Helping Battered Women. I want to welcome Janice Santiago and Emily Fredette. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
So Emily, what exactly does the term domestic violence mean?
So domestic violence is really complex, but the definition that we use is they are assaultive or coercive behaviors that someone uses to gain and maintain power and control over another person, and that's specifically an intimate partner or a family member. And when we look at domestic violence, we really look at intent, meaning, impact, and patterns. So we really look at the context of the incident and then see whether or not it's a pattern, because domestic violence is not just an isolated incident.
Mm-hmm. And so when we think of domestic violence, usually the thought is a man versus a woman, but it's more than that.
Absolutely. While statistically 85% of survivors are female, females can be batterers, and it happens at the same rate in LGBTQ relationships. It happens about 1 in 3 LGBTQ relationships. So
and what's LGBTQ related?
So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer is the umbrella term. So a lot of people think same-sex relationships. It happens at the same rate.
Just two people or a family?
Yep.
No matter how that ends. Okay. And so what do we know about the prevalence of domestic violence in Vermont?
So nationally, it affects 1 in 3 women and 1 in 9 men, and those statistics are reflective in the state of Vermont, and specifically Chittenden County. Last year, we served over 5,300 survivors right here in Chittenden County.
And so what services does Women Helping Battered Women provide?
So Women Helping Battered Women provides a multitude of services. The first sort of gateway into our agency is our 24-hour confidential hotline. So we have a hotline that anybody can reach 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then from there, we provide emotional support. We have emergency housing and transitional housing. So if someone is in imminent danger due to domestic violence, they can enter an emergency housing program. And then sort of long-term, we have a transitional housing apartment building. And we also have legal advocacy. So our advocates are there in the courtrooms to inform and assist people with things such as relief from abuse orders or divorce or custody. And we also offer economic justice and employment advocacy, so budgeting, finance, credit repair, and employment advocacy help with people being financially independent with resumes and cover letters. And we also have children and youth program, because children are in this situation too, and they're really vulnerable. So we have a children's advocate who can do one-on-one mentoring as well as supportive play groups. And then we do education and outreach. So we're in schools from elementary school to college. We're in the community with businesses, with faith-based organizations. So we're all over the county.
Let's just go through some of these. Why is emergency housing such an issue?
It's a safety concern when people are right then and that point in a domestic violence situation. If there was like a police call, or if there was something that right then happened, or if they were afraid, they need a safe place to go. To leave immediately. They need a safety plan to get out and leave. And again, as we were talking before, when the victim tries to leave and the perpetrator or the abuser is losing control, that is the most dangerous time in that relationship. So it is in their best interest to get away and to be someplace that the batterer cannot find them, and then kind of settle in and rebuild and get support to change their lives or make a plan.
And so what goes into the thought process for instance, a woman saying, I've had it, I have to leave. What are some of the things that she needs to have lined up to do that?
So we really need to create a safety plan on what the safest way to leave is. So like Janice said, statistically the most dangerous time is when they go to leave. And so having a safe place to go, and that may not be a family member or a friend's house. Our shelter is confidentially located, so that could be safe. But just having all those pieces lined up about where you're going to go to keep yourself and most often your children safe.
But it can even be other things, as far as like having bags packed in the car, put them in the trunk, or whatever that looks like for the victim and for their children, whatever they're going to need. Talking to your children's school, if you have children that are in school, or talking and having some support out there, having a place step by step, like I can go here and then from there I can go there. Even in their homes or apartments, we've done a lot of safety planning around, you know, if my spouse gets upset, this is what happens, and kinds of things. So it's like, well, how about when you see these things happening, can you do this? And really thinking about, you know, putting the knives, like really thinking about what is in your home that is used against you or could be a safety concern, making sure that you have access out the back door. Do your neighbors know, and could you safely run to a neighbor to get away in that imminent moment where you feel like, you know, your life is in danger? So the biggest thing is it really depends. There's no cookie cutter. We can't tell one person what would work and then expect somebody else's situation to fit that.
Right.
So every call that we get is treated so individually. They are given we give them back the power and the control to say, this is where I'm at, this is what I need, or I don't know what I need, what can you help me with, or what things should I be thinking about? And we provide suggestions and support and encouragement and information, and let the victims decide what is best for them, because only they know exactly the trigger points and what could happen in their situation.
What are some of the warning signs to be aware of or to look for?
Warning signs of a survivor would be someone who's withdrawn, maybe unexplained bruises or fractures, always checking in with partners. Survivors typically, they reach out to their partner, they eagerly try to please them, and so constant checking in and trying to please their partner, or inconsistent attendance with work or school. And then warning signs of a batterer. What we know about batterers is they abuse authority or take no accountability. They are very hypersensitive or have sort of economic control, or they're very dominant in every part of their life, not just with intimate partner relationships, but in every aspect of their life. But again, these are just some warning signs. A lot of times you won't know. You're not going to know if someone's a survivor or someone's a batterer.
And it's not necessarily physical violence as well, too.
Absolutely. It can be emotional, it can be sexual, it can be economic, all different types of abuse.
And so what can someone do to support a friend who might be in an abusive relationship?
First and foremost, meet your friend or the survivor where they're at. And of course, we don't mean that physically, but we mean that wherever they're at in their process. So they may just want someone to talk to. They may just want a supportive friend. And
they may just want to tell someone what's happening.
Exactly, exactly. So not using words like, well, you should leave, you need to leave. Really asking those open-ended questions. How can I support you where you're at right now? And then really respect that the survivor is the expert on their situation. They know their batterer best. And if they're telling you things like, it's not safe for me to leave, or it's not safe for me to do that, they know that. They know how to keep themselves safe. And then seeking support for yourself. Being a secondary survivor is really difficult, being a friend or a loved one.
It's a hard position to be in.
Absolutely. And all of the hotlines in Vermont, the 14 member agencies, our hotlines are available to friends and family members to get support for themselves, because you're not going to be a supportive friend or family member if you don't feel supported yourself.
And we do get a lot of calls from parents, co-workers or bosses, employers, just calling to say, I know this person, or I suspect, and what can I do? And it's a very frustrating situation or position to be in, but it comes back down to, don't you go and do something that you think is right, like, you necessarily, I mean, if somebody's life is in danger, obviously the police are going to be the best go-to, but that's not always, you know, calling the school, reporting different things, really talking to that person, and not doing something without their approval or their consent of doing it, because it could make things far more dangerous for them in the, you know, when it comes back around. But just knowing it, and we do acknowledge, we understand that it's very difficult. It takes 7 times on average for someone to leave their, you know, batterer before they finally get the ability to leave fully and completely and really just walk away from that relationship. It means they still need a lot of support and counseling and help, but it takes 7 times really to financially and economically just be able to move away and to let go of some of the issues that are there.
And that's tough too. If you're a friend of this person and you see this over and over, then you're like, come on.
Yep.
And that's absolutely one of the worst things you can do, is break yourself away because you're frustrated. You know, the best thing that you can do for a loved one is to just constantly be there through the entire step of their process, and even after, because it is going to be hard and they may go back, and just always reminding them that you're there.
And also, too, we were talking earlier, and obviously physical violence, there are laws for that.
Right.
But some of the things that happen in an abusive relationship, it's not necessarily breaking a law.
Exactly. And that's the biggest thing, is a lot of victim survivors don't come forward because they don't feel like anybody's going to believe them, or they're not going to think that what is happening to them is actually, violence, and it's wrong. So a lot of it is educating everybody and saying, we do know that these things constitute domestic violence, and they come in a lot of different ways, and it's really about power and control in somebody's life. So how is this person gaining power and control and using that in your life? But that is the big issue, is people don't believe what they're going to tell you, so they don't often tell you, because it may sound silly or odd, or be like, oh, that's nothing, or why don't you just do this, or why do you let them do this? And it's not as easy as that.
Can you give me maybe a few examples for people who are watching who think, perhaps I know someone who's being abused, or perhaps I'm being abused, or am I just being too sensitive to what someone is saying to me?
I think a couple of things that come to my head right away is the economic piece of it. If you're not allowed access to your bank accounts, if you have to ask for every penny, and you have to account for every penny that you spend on, what do you spend it on, where do you spend it? A vehicle, if you're not allowed to drive yourself different places or go about where you want, when you want, and as you want, if your partner is looking at the odometer and saying, what, you were only supposed to go here, and I know, it's really those controlling elements of your everyday life where you feel like you can't do anything without that person checking in and having that control. But there's also, we've heard so many different horrendous stories where it's like sexual stuff. It's manipulating a system and kind of keeping children away from the other parent if they don't do what they want. So it just really varies, and it covers, in my time with Women Helping, you hear stories and it's, your parents can be in a violent situation, having that understanding, having that awakening of, oh, this isn't right, and how do you help a parent that is in a situation? So I don't know if you have anything else that comes.
It really comes down to your gut. If you don't feel safe, or if you don't feel comfortable in your relationship, then chances are there's something wrong. And again, a survivor is going to know that best. You know your relationship best, and if you don't feel safe and you don't feel comfortable, then chances are it's not a healthy relationship.
Let's talk a little bit about the community impact of domestic violence.
So when you think about why don't people leave and all this other stuff, so usually it comes down to the victim to have to leave. So that usually means, in a lot of our cases, it's women and children. So where are they going to go? In Chittenden County, we know there's a housing shortage already. So when you take, more people out of their homes that need housing, so you have a housing, and it adds to the housing crunch. And there's been a lot of reports around, the different methods that we're using to try to house people who have a domestic violence situation. But then you also figure if they're leaving, then they also need other things as well. So the food system is impacted, the healthcare system, all these different things, health insurance costs go up because of domestic violence. So it impacts all these other areas. It impacts people's employment and places of work. So if they're not working, they're going to be unemployment, or they're just going to be unemployed, and then they're going to need more services and supports. Something to keep in mind is, we just had a big community event where we brought together community partners from all different segments, and a lot of the faith leaders that were there talked about how they have people showing up at their doors every day looking for something, whether it's shelter, food, money, whatever. So if we could prevent more domestic violence, there's not going to be that need, and then the faith community can work on some of the other issues. So it really does come full circle and impact every aspect of your life. It impacts your school, it impacts your children at school, it impacts so many elements of your life, and that people just don't put those pieces together.
And so what's the statewide hotline? How can people get help?
So they can call 1-800-ABUSE-95, and that is our state hotline. And what it's going to do is it's going to know where you are when you call, and it's going to connect you with the member program. There are 14 of them that is closest to your area. Could be us, could be any other.
Are there any myths associated with domestic violence?
Absolutely. That domestic violence only happens to women, and we know that that's not true. That domestic violence doesn't happen in same-sex relationships. Again, we know that that's not true. And that domestic violence really only happens in lower-income families, and that's not true either. Abuse does not discriminate. It can happen to anyone of any age, any race, any religion, any income or education level, sexual orientation or gender identity.
And do you welcome people's call to the hotline who might just have questions, who maybe aren't sure?
Absolutely, absolutely. We are available to anyone, whether they identify as a survivor or a loved one, or even community partners who may be interacting with people who they know are survivors.
And once again, if you have a friend you suspect is having some trouble, it's okay to call as well?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And we have, when you call the hotline, the state hotline, and you get connected to our agency, and we have real people answering the phone 24 hours a day. So no matter what time you call, you will actually really get a real person on the other end to provide emotional support, information, and resources, which is a great thing that we have. And then, you know, our staff, our trained advocates, volunteers, everybody takes time to cover the hotline. So, you know, every time you call, if you call more than once, you may get a different person, but we all are there to support and provide, and we all have expertise in some areas over others. So if you call me with a legal question, I'm going to hopefully refer you over to our legal advocates, because that's what their area is. Or we have like our transitional housing program. It just depends on what their need is at the time. Who we want to fit them with the people in our organization that can best support them. But we all are there really at the heart of it to encourage them, help keep people safe.
I want to thank you both for joining me today. A lot of important information.
Thanks.
That's our program for today. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.
For a video copy of today's program, call toll-free 1-888-ATF-3430. Across the Fence is brought to you as a public service by University of Vermont Extension and WCAX-TV.